I was folding a stranger's laundry for $6 an hour when the son who stole my bookstore walked in wearing my late husband's watch. My name is Eleanor Voss. I'm 64 years old, and until 11 months ago, I owned Voss & Daughters Print and Paper, a little shop on the corner of Marigold and 9th in Portland that my husband Daniel and I built with our own hands over 31 years. I never imagined that after burying him, I would be standing behind a folding table in a laundromat that smells like bleach and old coins, watching my own son wear the one thing I asked to keep. The wash house on 9th was loud in a way I never got used to, dryers thudding like a heartbeat that never rested, and I had been there 9 weeks, learning how to smile through the ache in my shoulders, and how to swallow my pride every time someone dumped a bag of dirty sheets in front of me, like I was furniture. This was not the life I planned. After Daniel died, my son Marcus and his wife Priya offered to handle the paperwork because I could barely see through the grief, and I let them, because that is what you do when you trust the boy you raised. Transfer was temporary, just to protect the business from probate delays. They told me it was for my own good, and in my fog of mourning, I signed where they told me to sign. By the time I understood what had happened, the shop was already listed under a company I'd never heard of. The business account was drained, and I was left with a small widow's pension that barely covered rent on a studio apartment above a dry cleaner. Marcus said I was being dramatic. Priya said I should be thankful they hadn't put me in a home. I didn't have the strength left to fight either of them, so I found the cheapest room I could afford, took the first job the unemployment office offered me, and started over at an age when most people are supposed to be slowing down, not learning how to operate an industrial dryer. In my second week at the wash house, I met him. Walter Chen came in every evening at exactly 6:15 and sat in the plastic chair by the window with a single small basket of clothes that never seemed to need washing at all. He wore the same grey cardigan, had thinning white hair, and moved like every step cost him something. He ordered nothing, because there was nothing to order. Just water from the cooler and a folded newspaper he never seemed to read. His hands shook slightly when he reached for his basket, but his eyes, when they landed on you, were sharp enough to make you forget the shaking entirely. I noticed him the way tired people notice other tired people, quietly and without asking questions. One evening, when the shop was nearly empty and my feet had gone numb from standing, I brought him a paper cup of the coffee I'd made for myself and set it beside his basket without a word. He looked up, surprised, and said, "Thank you, Mrs. Voss," in a voice so soft I almost missed it. It startled me that he knew my name, since I never wore a tag, but I was too tired that night to wonder about it for long. Still, I noticed things. He watched the door more than a lonely old man should. Once, when a black car idled across the street for almost 20 minutes, I saw him glance at it and then quickly look away, his jaw tightening in a way that didn't match his gentle face. That was the first sign that Walter was not exactly who he appeared to be, though I had no reason yet to think it mattered. Walter and I fell into a rhythm that became the quiet center of my days. I would tie on my apron, wait for the 6 o'clock rush to thin out, and right on schedule, the bell above the door would ring, and there he'd be, basket in hand, nodding at me like we shared a secret neither of us had spoken aloud. He didn't talk much, but slowly, over folded towels and quarters for the machines, he told me pieces of himself. His wife Rosalind had passed away 4 years earlier. He had a daughter, Naomi, who lived across the country and rarely called. When he said her name, his voice always dropped, like he was setting down something heavy he didn't want to drop too hard. When I asked what he used to do for work, he waved a hand and said something vague about logistics, then changed the subject so quickly I learned not to ask again. There were other small oddities I filed away without understanding. A man in a well-cut coat sometimes waited outside during Walter's visits, never entering, never approaching, just watching the door, the way a guard watches an entrance. Walter never once looked directly at him, but I noticed his shoulders would stiffen every time that man appeared, and the tremor in his hands would grow slightly worse. One evening, after a brutal double shift, I barely had time to eat, and Walter noticed the way I kept glancing at the clock instead of my own dinner. "Sit down and eat something," he said quietly, pushing his own untouched water toward me like it might help. "I'm fine," I told him. "Just a long day." He was quiet for a moment, then said, The people who work themselves into the ground are usually the ones nobody thinks to check on until it's too late to matter. It cut deeper than a stranger's comment should have, and I wasn't sure if he meant me, or himself, or someone else entirely. That night, when he saw me eating a sad little sandwich from a vending machine between loads, he asked if he could have half, and when I handed it over, his eyes went glassy in a way that had nothing to do with the fluorescent lighting. "Nobody's shared a meal with me like that in a long time," he said, and I understood then that his loneliness wasn't simple. It had edges to it, history to it, things he carried and didn't explain. And yet there were moments I caught him studying me, the way you study something you're trying to decide whether you can trust. One night, while I wiped down the folding table, he asked, out of nowhere, "Do you think people who choose money over their own family can ever really find their way back?" Before I could answer him, the door opened, and the man in the well-cut coat stepped inside for the first time, walking straight toward Walter with the calm of someone finishing an errand he didn't enjoy. Walter didn't look up right away. He wrapped both hands around his water cup like he was bracing for something only he could see coming. The man leaned down, said something too quiet for me to catch, and placed a folded slip of paper on the table beside Walter's basket, then left without buying so much as a roll of quarters. Walter gave the smallest nod, not agreement, just acknowledgement, and went back to folding his clothes like nothing at all had happened, though I stood frozen behind the counter for a long moment after the bell above the door stopped swinging. I didn't have time to think about it further, because that was the exact moment the door chimed again, and my stomach dropped straight through the floor. Priya walked in, wearing sunglasses indoors, and the same smug tilt to her chin she'd worn the day she told me I needed to get used to my new circumstances. She spotted me instantly. "Oh my God," she said loudly, to no one and everyone at once. "You're actually still doing this." The dryers kept spinning, but every conversation in the room seemed to pause. "Hi, Priya," I said carefully. "What are you doing here?" She let out a short laugh. I was in the neighborhood and wanted to see it for myself. "You look wrecked, Eleanor. Isn't this a bit much for someone your age?" My face went hot. "Priya, please, not here." She raised her voice even more. "What? I'm just saying it's kind of sad, watching you fold strangers' underwear for pocket change." A few people glanced over, some sympathetic, a couple almost entertained, and I felt the walls of that laundromat close in around me the way they had 100 times since the day the shop was taken. And then Walter stood. It was the first time in 9 weeks I had ever seen him move quickly. The trembling hands, the careful, aching posture, all of it seemed to disappear as he rose to his full height, which was taller than I had realized. His voice, when it came, was flat and cold, in a way I hadn't heard from him before. "That's enough," he said. Priya blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Walter said, stepping closer. "Sit down, or leave. Eleanor is speaking, and you will listen." Priya scoffed, clearly trying to place who this stranger thought he was. "And who exactly are you? Her charity case from the laundromat?" Something shifted behind Walter's eyes. "You have no idea who I am," he said quietly, and reached into his cardigan pocket for a phone I hadn't even known he carried. His voice dropped into something low and precise. "This is Chen. I need the car and the team at the wash house on 9th immediately. Standard protocol." 4 words that meant nothing to me, and everything, apparently, to whoever was on the other end, because within 2 minutes, the bell rang again, and 3 people in plain, dark jackets walked in and quietly positioned themselves near the exits without a word, without a single dramatic gesture, just presence. Priya went pale and took a step back. Walter looked at her, unbothered by her sunglasses, or her tone, or anything else about her. "You will not speak to this woman that way again," he said, and the entire laundromat seemed to hold its breath at once. In the stunned quiet that followed, Priya turned to me with something between fear and confusion. "Mum," she said, though she hadn't called me that in months, "what is happening? Who is this man?" And for the first time, I had to admit the truth to both of us. I had no idea. Walter turned toward me, his expression softening back into the gentle man I thought I knew, though now it carried a weight underneath it I hadn't noticed before. "Eleanor," he said, "I think it's time we talked somewhere quiet." He gestured to the small back office the owner sometimes let me use for breaks, and the 3 men by the door stayed exactly where they were, a silent wall between the shop and whatever chaos might try to follow us. Priya reached for my sleeve. "Don't go with him," she whispered, suddenly sounding like a frightened child instead of the woman who had just humiliated me in front of strangers. Walter didn't even glance at her. "She is safer with me right now than you are being honest with yourself," he said, and something in his tone made her let go immediately. I followed him into that cramped little office, my pulse pounding in my ears, and he set a worn leather folder on the desk between us, his fingers resting on it without a single tremor left in them. First, he said, "I owe you an apology. I never meant for the truth to come out like this, but your daughter-in-law forced my hand tonight." "Truth about what?" I asked, barely above a whisper. He took a slow breath, choosing his words with obvious care. "My name is Walter Chen. I'm not retired. Not really. For 36 years, I built Chen Freight and Marine Logistics into one of the largest independent shipping networks on the West Coast. We move the containers that stock half the grocery stores you've shopped at your whole life, though nobody who buys the milk ever thinks about who moved it there." My mouth went dry. I had heard of Chen Freight. Everyone in the shipping and retail world had. It was massive and quiet and everywhere at once. "But 2 years ago," he continued, "after my wife died, my daughter and the board tried to force an early transfer of control. They called it succession planning. I called it a vote of no confidence, dressed up in kind language. So I stepped back, let people believe age had finally caught up with me, and disappeared into an ordinary life to see who would treat me like a person instead of a signature on a document. And you found me," I whispered. "I found you," he said gently, "the moment you handed me half a sandwich without knowing a single thing about who I was or what I could do for you. I began quietly looking into your situation not long after." My stomach turned over. "Looking into what, exactly?" "Your son and his wife didn't only trick you into signing," Walter said. "They forged an updated power of attorney, backdated a business transfer, and routed the proceeds of your shop's sale through an account that has no legal registration anywhere in this state." My breath caught in my throat. "What they did, Eleanor, is not a family disagreement. It's a crime." And I felt dizzy enough to grip the edge of the desk just to stay upright. He opened the leather folder and turned it so I could see the pages inside. Not scribbles, not vague notes, but careful records, copies of documents, dated entries, and small red circles around the details that mattered most. The first page was the deed to Voss and Daughters, and beneath it, in Walter's handwriting, one word, "forged." "This signature block was replaced after the fact," he said, tapping the corner gently. "Whoever handled the paperwork used a basic scanning trick, sloppy but effective enough to fool a grieving woman who trusted her own son." I stared at it, sick to my stomach. Marcus told me it was standard probate paperwork. "Standard for someone hoping you'd never look closely," Walter said, and turned to another page. This one full of withdrawals I never authorized. Transfers routed through a shell company registered under the name Brightline Holdings, an entity that does not legally exist as a business anywhere on record. "I don't want them arrested," I said quietly, hearing my own voice crack. "They're my family." Walter's expression didn't harden. It softened, if anything. "Family isn't defined by blood, Eleanor. It's defined by whether someone protects you or profits off you. And right now, the paperwork tells its own story about which one your son chose." I wiped my eyes, but the tears kept coming anyway. He continued gently. "My legal team has already traced the money, the digital footprints, and enough documentation to pursue charges for elder financial abuse and fraudulent transfer, if that's the road you want to take." I shook my head slowly. "I don't want revenge. You won't get revenge," he said. "You'll get your life back." And he flipped to a final page where bold print announced a scheduled closing date for the sale of my shop's building, less than 9 days away, to a buyer I had never once heard of. "They're selling it," I whispered. "They've been negotiating quietly for weeks," Walter said. "The closing you're looking at is final. Once it goes through, everything becomes far harder to undo." My chest tightened at the thought of Daniel's shop, his handwriting still faintly visible on the old inventory ledgers we never digitized, being handed off to a stranger like it meant nothing at all. "I can stop that sale by morning," Walter said calmly. "I can have the transfer frozen under suspicion of fraud with one phone call." My hands were shaking too hard to fold in my lap properly. What happens to Marcus? I asked. That depends entirely on you, he answered, and I searched his face for any hint of what he thought I should do, but found only patience, the kind that comes from someone who has weathered worse storms than mine and knows better than to rush another person's grief. I don't want to destroy him, I said finally. I just want back what Daniel and I built. I want some peace before I run out of years to enjoy it. Walter nodded and closed the folder softly. Then peace is exactly what we'll aim for, he said, and stood, offering me his hand, the way you'd offer someone a hand up after a long fall. Eleanor, you've been stripped of nearly everything. It's time you took it back, piece by piece, on your own terms. The next morning felt like someone else's life entirely. Walter arranged a meeting at the old shop with a speed that left my head spinning, his people securing the space before I'd even finished my coffee. Walking back through that door sent an ache straight down my spine. The smell of paper and old ink still clinging faintly to the walls, the way it had for 31 years, though now it felt cold, borrowed, wrong in a way I couldn't quite name. 2 attorneys, calm and unreadable, waited near the old counter where Daniel used to ring up customers by hand, long after everyone else had switched to computers. At exactly 10 o'clock, the bell above the door rang, and Marcus walked in, expecting to meet the buyer, his expression bright with the particular confidence of someone who has never once imagined consequences catching up to him. Then he saw me sitting beside Walter, and his face fell apart in real time. "What is this?" he demanded. "Where's the buyer? We have a signing scheduled." Walter slid a printed folder across the counter without a word. "Your signing has been postponed indefinitely," he said. Marcus snatched it up, flipping through pages with growing panic. "What is all this supposed to be?" "Evidence," Walter said, his voice steady as still water hiding a strong current underneath, "of every falsified document, every unauthorized transfer, every dollar routed through an account that never legally existed." Marcus's breath caught audibly. This doesn't prove. It proves exactly what it says it does," Walter said. "You forged your mother's signature, drained her accounts, and tried to sell a building that legally never stopped being hers." Marcus turned to me, something close to desperation in his eyes. "Mom, tell him he's wrong. Tell him it was just paperwork. Tell him we were helping you." "I know exactly what you did," I said, my voice steadier than I expected it to be. His shoulders sagged, and for the first time since Daniel's funeral, he looked less like the confident man who told me to accept my new circumstances, and more like the frightened boy I remembered from decades earlier. "Are you having us arrested?" he asked quietly. Walter set another document on the counter between us. "That depends on what you choose to do next," he said. "You will return every dollar, every asset, and every ownership stake to your mother. You will complete a full year of financial ethics counseling, and you will respect whatever boundaries she sets going forward. Do all of that, and no charges will be filed." "And if I don't?" Marcus asked, his voice barely audible. "Then this becomes a matter for the district attorney's office," Walter said simply. "And the possible penalties include real prison time. Not a warning, not a lecture, an actual sentence." Marcus's legs seemed to give slightly, and he lowered himself into the chair across from me, tears finally breaking through the composure he'd worn like armor for months. "Mom, I'm sorry," he choked out. "I'm so sorry." And for the first time, I saw something honest cross his face instead of performance. Fear not of Walter, but of what he had actually let himself become. I reached across the counter and took his shaking hand in mine. "Then sign," I said softly. "And let's find out if we can start again from something true, instead of something stolen." His hand trembled as he picked up the pen, and with a long, broken breath, he signed my life back into my own name. 7 months have passed since that morning, and my life has slowly stitched itself back together in ways I never expected it could. The shop is legally mine again, and I open it most mornings just as Daniel used to, breathing in fresh paint and old paper, after Walter quietly funded the repairs the building had needed for years, never once mentioning the cost. And I never once asked. It felt less like charity, and more like someone returning a piece of me I thought was gone for good. Marcus kept his word. He attends counseling every week, works a modest job across town, and respects every boundary I've set without complaint. Our relationship is still fragile, something you handle carefully, like glass that remembers being dropped once already, but it's honest now, which is more than I had for a long time. Priya moved out of state within a month, and I haven't heard from her since, and I can't say I've mourned the silence. Walter visits the shop often, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with updates from his own family, because there was still something unresolved on his end too. His daughter Naomi, who barely spoke to him before all of this began. One afternoon while I was sorting new inventory, the bell rang, and I expected Walter, but instead, a woman in a sharp charcoal coat walked in with a guarded, unreadable expression. "I'm looking for Eleanor Voss," she said. "That's me," I answered carefully. She studied me for a long moment. "I'm Naomi Chen," she said. "I want to understand why my father is restructuring his entire estate around a woman he's known less than a year, someone who apparently now has a say in decisions that used to belong to the family." The accusation stung more than I expected it to. "I'm not influencing anything," I told her honestly. "Your father makes his own decisions, and he always has." Her jaw tightened. He updated his will. He named new beneficiaries. He changed the plans my brother and I grew up assuming were permanent, and it all happened after he met you. Before I could answer, the door opened again, and Walter stepped in, holding 2 cups of coffee, freezing at the sight of his daughter standing in front of me. "Naomi?" he said quietly. She turned on him immediately. "Why her? Why replace your own children with someone you barely know?" "Don't raise your voice in here," Walter said, though there was real hurt beneath the firmness in his tone. "I haven't replaced anyone. I simply chose to value the person who showed me kindness when she had every reason not to bother." Naomi's eyes filled with something sharper than anger, something closer to grief finally surfacing. "That isn't fair," she whispered. "We stayed away because you shut us out completely. You told us nothing. You just vanished." "And when I was drowning in grief over your mother," Walter said softly, "you saw only weakness in me, not a person who needed you to simply show up." Naomi flinched like she'd been struck. He continued gently, "Eleanor hasn't taken a single thing from you, Naomi. She's simply the one who stayed when it would have been easier to walk away." The room went quiet for a long moment, and then Naomi's voice cracked open. "Is it too late?" she asked. Walter's shoulders eased slightly. "Not if you're willing to build something honest from here forward," he said. And for the first time, Naomi's composure broke completely as she wiped at her eyes and nodded. "Then show me where to start," she whispered, and Walter reached out a hand, which she hesitated over for only a second before taking it. That evening, the 3 of us sat outside the shop as the streetlights flickered on. No accusations left between us, just quiet conversation and the small, careful beginnings of something none of us had expected to find again. In the months since, peace has settled into my life in slow, steady waves, gentle at first, then strong enough to actually hold me. I wake early now, make my own coffee, and walk to the shop before the street even wakes up. And every single morning reminds me that I survived the kind of loss that is designed to break a person completely. And somehow, from that wreckage, something good was still possible. Walter and I never gave a name to whatever grew between us. It isn't quite romance, though there's real affection there, and it isn't only friendship either, though that's how it began. It's something closer to 2 people who were both discarded by those who should have protected them, choosing instead to build something steady out of what was left. He handed me an envelope on the dock behind the shop one morning, plain and unassuming, and inside was a document naming me a partner in a new initiative he'd started, one built to help widows, seniors, and small family businesses recognize financial exploitation before it costs them everything. "This is your story," he told me, "turned into something that protects someone else before it's too late for them too." My throat tightened. "Walter, I don't know that I deserve this," I told him. He just smiled and said, "You kept your heart open when every reason in the world told you to shut it down completely. That's exactly the kind of person this should belong to." Marcus and I have lunch together twice a month now, and while trust hasn't returned overnight, I can see real pieces of the son I raised slowly coming back into focus. He brings me the same coffee I used to make for Daniel, without me ever telling him the order. And one afternoon he took my hand and said, "Thank you for not giving up on me completely." And those words meant more to me than anything a court could have ordered him to say. Telling you all of this now, I understand something I wish I'd learned decades earlier, that we don't get to choose the betrayals life hands us, and we certainly don't get to choose who ends up breaking our hearts, but we absolutely get to choose what we become in the aftermath of that breaking. Most people, when they're stripped down to nothing the way I was, decide the safest thing is to close themselves off completely and trust no one ever again. And I understand that instinct. I lived inside it for months. But somewhere between the folding table at that laundromat and a stranger who noticed a tired woman before she noticed anything about him, I learned that the version of family worth keeping is built on honesty and loyalty, not on blood or obligation or old photographs. Most people watching this will finish this story, feel something for a moment, and then close the app and go back to whatever version of their own guarded life they were already living. And there is no shame in that. It's simply the easier road. But some of you are standing exactly where I once stood, quietly wondering whether it's too late to trust again, whether kindness still means anything in a world that seems built to punish it. And if that's you, I want you to know the fork in that road is real, and it is yours alone to choose, right now, before life makes the choice for you instead. Subscribe for more videos like